Before the sun crested the horizon over the Middle East, 12 U.S. fighter jets vanished into the dark sky. No fanfare, no warning. Among them, B-1B Lancers packed with GBU-31 bunker busters and F-15E Strike Eagles armed for speed and precision. Their destination? A hidden Houthi missile network buried deep within hostile terrain, an Iranian-backed stronghold thought to be untouchable. This was not a retaliation. It was a message, delivered in total silence. What followed was one of the most precisely coordinated airstrikes in modern memory, executed with such stealth that enemy radar never stood a chance. And by the time Iran's proxies even noticed, it was already over. So why now? And what happens next? Let's discover the answer together. In the dead of night, while the desert winds whispered across a remote U.S. airbase in the Middle East, something extraordinary was unfolding. There were no sirens, no shouts, no visible signs of urgency, only movement guided by discipline. Beneath a canopy of stars, floodlights glowed faintly along the tarmac as technicians, weapons specialists, and flight crews worked with near-religious focus. It was the kind of operation that lived in shadows. Every step followed a protocol honed over decades. Pallets loaded with JDAMs, GPS-guided precision bombs, were quietly rolled into position beside the long wings of the B-1B Lancer bombers. Next to them, the unmistakable shape of GBU-31 bunker busters gleamed under red-tinted lamps, waiting to be armed. These weren't ordinary munitions. They were designed to penetrate deep, through concrete steel and decades of enemy concealment. Nearby, F-15E Strike Eagles sat in formation, their matte gray fuselages absorbing the dim light. Their payload was different, laser-guided bombs and air-to-ground missiles optimized for mobile targets. If the Lancers were the hammer, the Strike Eagles were the scalpel. But none of this could afford even the smallest mistake. Each bomb was manually connected to its release system. Specialists checked the fuse timers, targeting links and GPS calibration. Not once, not twice, but in cycles. Because in this kind of mission, a single misstep could cost lives, or the mission itself. Ground crews moved in coordinated silence, guided by checklists, hand signals, and encrypted comms. The only sounds were the hum of generators, the rhythmic clicking of tools, and the occasional distant voice from the ops tent. Outside the base perimeter, the desert remained silent, but inside, time was accelerating. Inside the hardened hangars, pilots suited up, not in haste, but with quiet intent. Every detail mattered. Helmets checked, oxygen flow tested, mission maps memorized. In briefing rooms, dimly lit with red bulbs, commanders pointed to satellite imagery, intercepted comms, and ISR drone visuals. Each pilot knew their role, flight path, altitude, and contingency maneuver. There was no room for ego, only precision. What made this phase so vital wasn't just secrecy, it was synchronization. Bombers, fighters, growlers, surveillance drones, all had to move like clockwork. No delay, no second chance. By 0437, final checks were completed. Bombs were armed. Fuel lines retracted. The formation was cleared for launch. The ground crews stepped back. And in that moment, before the thunder of engines shattered the silence, a truth hung in the air. The battlefield had already begun to shift even before the first aircraft left the ground. As the final green lights flickered on across the flight line, the silence gave way to controlled energy. One by one, the aircraft were released from their chocks. The first to roll out was the B-1B Lancer, a long-range bomber designed to bring unmatched firepower into enemy territory without ever being seen. But its real power wasn't in its speed, it was in what it carried beneath its wings. Locked into the belly of the Lancer were multiple JDAMs, Joint Direct Attack munitions. These weren't simple gravity bombs. Outfitted with advanced GPS guidance kits, they could correct their own path mid-air, adjusting for wind, target movement, and terrain. They were smart, quiet, and devastating. But for this mission, something more powerful was needed. Loaded alongside the JDAMs were GBU-31s, bunker busters made to pierce layers of reinforced concrete and steel. These 2,000-pound giants weren't just designed to destroy buildings. They were made to obliterate command centers buried dozens of feet underground. In this mission, they would serve as the spear tip, targeting the hardened infrastructure that allowed enemy leaders to coordinate, hide, and strike from the shadows. While the B-1Bs provided the brute force, the F-15E Strike Eagles brought speed, adaptability, and precision. Each Strike Eagle was armed with a mixed payload: laser-guided bombs, AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and air-to-ground rockets, optimized for engaging mobile or fast-responding targets. Their task was twofold: neutralize any surviving threats after the B-1Bs struck, and defend the formation against aerial or ground-based attacks if necessary. Their ability to fly low and fast, using terrain masking to avoid radar, made them ideal for surgical strikes on radars, missile trucks, or convoy units that might attempt to flee once the attack began. But firepower alone wouldn't be enough. Supporting both platforms was a crucial but unseen asset: the EA-18G Growler, an electronic warfare aircraft flying high above and slightly behind the strike package. Its role was to jam, deceive, and blind enemy air defense systems. The Growler didn't carry bombs. Its weapon was confusion, casting a web of false radar signals, interrupting targeting systems, and masking the real flight paths of the jets below. In the background, AWACS aircraft and ISR drones continued feeding real-time intelligence into the operation. If a new radar ping was detected, if a vehicle convoy moved, or if an enemy aircraft was scrambled, that data would reach pilots within seconds. The entire battle environment was being shaped, not just by bombs, but by information. This was not a conventional strike. It was a synchronized dance between brute force and finesse, between stealth and shock. Every aircraft had its mission. Every weapon had a name, a target, and a reason. And as the formation accelerated toward hostile skies, each crew knew the next few minutes could shift the course of months, perhaps years of regional conflict. With every weapon secured and every system synced, the operation crossed an invisible threshold, from preparation to execution. At precisely 0449, the first roar of the B-1B Lancer's engines pierced the calm desert air. Its 4 turbofan power plants lit up the flight line, sending vibrations through the tarmac as the bomber thundered forward. Moments later, a staggered launch of F-15E Strike Eagles followed, sleek, fast, and razor-focused. This was not a routine flight. Every movement, every turn, every climb was mapped to the second. The strike group entered a carefully calculated flight corridor. Altitudes were staggered, speed profiles were adjusted. Each aircraft flew with minimum radar cross-section, using a combination of terrain masking and electronic silence to evade detection. The B-1Bs flew high just below the radar horizon, while the F-15Es dove low, hugging the contours of hills and valleys like shadows. Above them, the EA-18G Growler came to life. Its jamming pods activated intermittently, sending out bursts of disruptive energy. Enemy radar systems in the region began to flicker, seeing ghosts, false returns, blank spots. Confusion, not confrontation, was the mission's best ally. It was not brute stealth alone that protected the formation, but coordinated chaos. Farther back, AWACS monitored regional air traffic while ISR drones hovered silently near the border, capturing imagery and relaying every movement below. The battlefield was being watched from every angle. Communication across the group was encrypted, brief, and efficient. Pilots spoke only when necessary. Every update was crucial. Airspace status, electronic interference, minor changes in ground activity. And then came the danger zone. As the formation neared Yemeni airspace, the environment shifted. Mountains gave way to flatlands. Radar coverage grew thicker. Enemy early warning systems were known to be active along this corridor. Systems provided or upgraded with Iranian technology. But thanks to precise timing, the aircraft passed these thresholds at the edge of sensor range during the narrow pre-dawn window when visibility was weakest. Inside cockpits, pilots adjusted displays. Bomb targeting systems began running final calibration. Infrared cameras searched the ground for telltale heat signatures. In the lead B-1B, the weapons officer stared at a digital map dotted with pre-programmed targets, each one a hardened threat buried in reinforced structures. For the F-15E pilots, the tension was different. They weren't just looking at fixed points, they were hunting movement. Convoys, emitters, power generators, anything that might mobilize after the first wave hit. One by one, the aircraft reached their designated release points. And in that suspended moment, before a single bomb was dropped, the entire sky seemed to hold its breath. All systems were green, target confirmations locked in. The final phase was about to begin. At 0513, the command was given. Green light, strike confirmed, execute. In the lead B-1B Lancer, the weapons bay doors groaned open, revealing a full rack of JDAMs and GBU-31s. Within seconds, bombs began to drop, cleanly, deliberately, each one following its pre-programmed path toward the Earth. From above, they looked like falling stars, but what they carried was far more precise and far more final. Guided by a combination of satellite data and onboard GPS correction, the JDAMs adjusted mid-flight for wind, trajectory, and altitude. There was no guesswork, only math. The targets, underground command bunkers, ammunition depots, and hardened control centers used by the Houthis to coordinate drone strikes and missile launches across the region. The impact was immediate. From miles away, surveillance drones captured the first strikes in infrared. Massive explosions erupted across the desert floor. White-hot flashes followed by thick columns of smoke and flame. Seconds later, secondary detonations rippled through the landscape, suggesting the bombs had hit ammunition stockpiles or fuel storage. The ground shuddered. Communications towers toppled. Subterranean bunkers, once thought impervious, collapsed inward in a shower of debris. But the operation wasn't finished. Flying low and fast, the F-15E Strike Eagles initiated the second wave. Their role was to eliminate mobile threats and reactive defenses, anything that survived the initial barrage. Using laser-guided bombs and AGM-65 Maverick missiles, they struck radar installations, jamming trucks, and vehicle convoys attempting to escape the blast zone. Targets were painted and destroyed in seconds. One radar dish melted under a direct hit. A reinforced vehicle, loaded with communications gear, was torn apart mid-transit. Every movement below was monitored, assessed, and, if deemed a threat, neutralized. Throughout the assault, the EA-18G Growler continued its electronic barrage. When enemy air defense systems attempted to lock on, the Growler responded instantly, disrupting frequencies, feeding false coordinates, jamming signal lock. The enemy was blind, deaf, and paralyzed. Despite the complexity of the operation, the entire strike, from first bomb release to final missile impact, lasted under 10 minutes. But in those minutes, an entire network of command and control was wiped off the map. Inside Mission Control, analysts watched in real time as objective after objective turned from red to green. The Houthi network had been dismantled, not by a drawn-out war, but by coordinated precision, speed, and timing. As the last of the F-15Es pulled away from the target zone, infrared scans showed fires still burning, bunkers still collapsing, and no sign of enemy aircraft in the skies. Communications across the sector had gone dark. The enemy wasn't just hit, they were silenced. As the last explosion faded into the smoke-choked horizon, the strike force began the second half of its mission, getting out. If the entry was precise, the exit had to be surgical. No celebration, no delay. Just a clean withdrawal under tight control. The B-1B Lancers, now relieved of their heavy payloads, climbed sharply to higher altitudes. Their goal? Conserve fuel, expand radar coverage, and link more directly with aerial surveillance and support. Their massive wings adjusted automatically, optimizing lift for rapid, silent ascent. Below them, the F-15E Strike Eagles fanned out into defensive formation. Though the radar field was still in chaos, scrambled and blinded by EA-18G jamming, they could take no chances. Any remaining anti-air batteries or last-minute retaliatory launches had to be anticipated. The Eagles remained alert, fingers near the triggers, scanning every corner of the horizon with targeting pods and infrared scopes. Behind the formation, the EA-18G Growler maintained its critical role. With enemy systems still reeling, it sent out decoy pulses, masking the retreat path and simulating phantom formations to mislead ground-based radar. If the enemy tried to regroup, they'd be chasing ghosts. In the upper atmosphere, AWACS aircraft fed updated escape corridors, alerting pilots to changes in regional air traffic or unidentified aerial movements. But none came. The sheer speed and precision of the strike had left enemy response capability shattered. There was nothing left to send. Then came the refuel window. Hovering just outside contested airspace were two KC-135 Stratotankers, high above the conflict zone, waiting patiently. One by one, the strike aircraft connected with the boom arms mid-flight. The process was swift, seamless, and practiced. No landings, no exposure. Just enough fuel to return, reset, or, if needed, re-engage. Even in retreat, the strike group remained fully combat capable. Every aircraft stayed in formation, flying in near radio silence. Defensive systems remained online. Scanners swept continuously for missile locks, aircraft signatures, or electronic anomalies. But the skies stayed clear. On the ground, the enemy was still in disarray. Communications networks were down. Radar coverage was offline. Smoke plumes obscured the air. What once was a fortified command grid had become a shattered ruin. When the strike group crossed back into Allied-controlled airspace, a quiet acknowledgement crackled through the encrypted channels. Package clear. All assets accounted for. Zero losses. Back at base, ground crews stood ready. As the first aircraft touched down, teams rushed in. Not with applause, but with tools, checklists, and data scanners. Every airframe was checked. Every weapon pod inspected. Every pilot moved to debrief, where intelligence teams awaited real-time recollection of the mission. The strike had been a success. But more than that, it had been a statement. The United States had entered hostile airspace, dismantled an enemy network, and returned without a trace. No friendly casualties, no public escalation, no trail for enemies to follow. Just silence. And the knowledge that it could happen again at any time. As the last jet taxied into its hardened shelter and the hangar doors sealed shut behind it, the operation transitioned from military maneuver to geopolitical signal. The bombs had stopped falling, but the reverberations had only just begun. In Tehran, encrypted channels went silent. Within minutes of the strike, U.S. intelligence analysts observed a sudden drop in radio chatter between Houthi ground elements and their Iranian handlers. Communications hubs, once buzzing with coordinated orders, went dark. It wasn't just the infrastructure that had been dismantled. It was the invisible web of command and influence that tied the Houthis to the broader Iranian proxy network. This wasn't merely a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of reach. For Iran, the message was unmistakable. Your support for proxy forces is no longer a shield. It's a target. The United States didn't need a carrier strike group off your coast. It didn't need to mobilize battalions or make declarations at the UN. It simply acted, quickly, decisively, and without warning. This recalibrated the risk-reward equation. Iranian military planners, long confident in their strategy of asymmetric warfare, arming, training, and directing militias across the region, now had to contend with a new variable: the possibility that their assets could be neutralized not over weeks or months, but in 10 minutes, from thousands of miles away. And the message didn't stop in Tehran. In Sana'a, Houthi commanders scrambled to restore lost connections, only to find ground stations flattened and leadership bunkers smoldering. Rumors of missing officers and silent field units spread like wildfire. The chain of command had been fractured, and with it, the confidence that came from operating under Iran's protective shadow. Meanwhile, in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Tel Aviv, allies took note. For weeks, regional partners had grown uneasy as attacks on Red Sea shipping lanes and drone harassment intensified. Doubts lingered over whether Washington remained committed to regional deterrence. Those doubts vanished in one morning. The United States had not only responded, it had preempted. With no public warning, no bluster, and no escalation, it had struck at the heart of the threat and walked away untouched. It was more than just a strike. It was a promise to its allies, and a warning to its adversaries. And in the aftermath, the silence spoke louder than any press release. There were no retaliatory launches, no threats from Iranian state TV, no emergency meetings from proxy militias, just the quiet understanding that something fundamental had changed. The skies over Yemen may have cleared, but the balance of power in the region had shifted. And in that new silence, Iran and its network understood a hard truth. The next message might not come with words. It may come again, on wings, in shadows, and without a second chance to respond. In the old world of warfare, power was measured in boots on the ground, columns of tanks, and headlines filled with declarations of intent. But in the 21st century, strength is no longer about noise. It's about silence, speed, and precision, the kind that leaves no time to respond and no trace to retaliate. This strike was a textbook case. No prolonged deployment, no televised buildup, just a series of coordinated digital signals, laser-locked targets, and aircraft that flew in, hit, and vanished before dawn. It wasn't just the destruction of enemy infrastructure that mattered. It was the efficiency with which it was done. In under 10 minutes, a critical node in a proxy war network was surgically removed, and it was done with 0 U.S. casualties, no civilian damage, and maximum psychological impact. This is the future of American warfare, intelligence-driven, tech-enabled, and surgically executed. From the B-1B's precision-guided payloads to the Growler's electronic warfare capabilities, every asset played a role in painting a new kind of battlefield, one where disruption matters more than dominance, and clarity of objective outweighs the scale of force. For Iran and its proxies, the warning was clear. The U.S. doesn't need a war to win. It only needs a window, a few minutes of opportunity, powered by satellites, stealth, and silence. And for regional allies watching closely, this was the reassurance they had waited for. Modern power doesn't announce itself. It arrives, completes the mission, and disappears. That is the new doctrine. And it is already rewriting the rules of conflict in the Middle East and beyond. In the quiet that followed the strike, no sirens wailed, no headlines screamed. But beneath that silence, the message was undeniable. The United States still holds unmatched power, measured not by noise but by precision, timing, and resolve. This wasn't just about Yemen. It was a lesson for Tehran, for proxies, and for every actor watching the skies. War today isn't declared, it's delivered, cleanly and without warning. And sometimes, the greatest victories leave no footprints. You've seen history unfold before. Was this operation a turning point, or just the beginning? Share your thoughts below. We read every word.